Prepare for a Rood Awakening.
The modern Jewish calendar is based on the mathematical calculations of Rabbi Hillel II in the 4th century. With Israel being scattered over 3 continents, it was no longer practical or even possible to keep God's reckoning of time as it was kept for centuries. And so he came up with calculations to determine when the feasts were so that all of God's people could keep the feast on the same day. Now, after 1,700 years, that is when we see, 1,700 years later, that his calculations were not accurate enough to keep the calendar on track. And that's why the Jewish calendar, if we celebrate the feast according to the Jewish calendar, we're celebrating the feast over 60% of the time on the wrong day, just because the calendar has gotten out of sync with God's original reckoning. Now that we're back in the land of Israel, there's no reason why not to go back to the original reckoning of time. And to do that, first of all, we need to understand, as in Genesis 1:4, when did days begin according to God's reckoning of time? Sundown. Sundown is when the day begins. What time is sundown? When the sun goes down. Thank you very much. Now, when do weeks begin? First of all, we have to determine when the Sabbath is, and in our culture, it would be from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. That is the Sabbath. At the end of the Sabbath, when the sun goes down, that's the first day of the week. And that's when, it's real simple when you read in the Acts of the Jewish Apostles how that the disciples got together early on the first day of the week to break bread together. And as Paul began teaching, he taught late into the night until midnight, and a young man fell out of the window and killed himself. Not because his teaching was so bad, he just fell asleep. But yet, when they went out there and ministered to him, raised him from the dead, then everyone was so pumped up then, nobody is going to go to sleep tonight. So they stayed up all night, and when the sun came up, then Shaul took off on his next journey. Everyone else went to work. See, in our culture, when we think early the first day of the week, the first thing that comes into our mind is they had to get up on Sunday morning. Only in your Western Gentile mind, early the first day of the week, they got together to break bread. They're doing the same thing we still do today in the streets of Jerusalem. It's the third meal of Shabbat. After spending a whole day of studying the scriptures and resting, then we leave our homes, we go into a larger community of believers and sit around the table, and everyone brings food. And everyone has something to share. Everyone's got a hymn. Everyone's got a doctrine. Everyone's got a revelation. You wouldn't believe what the Lord showed me today. And it's just so exciting, so that we still do that to this very day in Israel. Among the Orthodox, among the Karaites, among the Messianic Jews, it's still done to this very day. And you know what? We drag the Sabbath out just as long as we possibly can. 2 o'clock in the morning, it's not uncommon to go till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes people say, do we have to keep the Sabbath? And it's like, wait, you don't understand. I mean, we drag it out as long as we can. I mean, God made it for us, and it's the one day of the week that He promised that when the sun goes down on Friday, we can tell the world to just keep their problems because they're going to have them at the end of the Sabbath. And we just take the whole day because He says if we keep it, He's going to make sure that we've got everything that we need in life. And it's true. I talked myself out of it for most of my life, but it's His provision. And we see that how weeks begin at the end of the Sabbath, when the sun goes down, that begins the week. Now, when do months begin? Months begin when the first sliver of the new moon appears. That is the beginning of the month. Now, of course, the moon waxes full mid-month, and then it wanes, and there is no moon. Then, when the first sliver of the new moon appears, this is what happened up until the destruction of Jerusalem. You have men in and around Jerusalem, when the moon is waned, now they're watching. Just as the sun is setting, they're watching the horizon for the first sliver of the new moon. When they have sighted the new moon, then men in and around Jerusalem will go up to the Temple Mount, and they will then call out to the temple guard, we have sighted the new moon. Temple guard comes down, sees that there are at least 2 witnesses. He goes up and gets a member of the Sanhedrin, the elders of Israel, And he comes down and he interviews those men, and when he has 2 verifiable sightings, then he goes up to the Temple Mount and assembles the elders in the Hall of Hewn Stones adjacent to the temple, and then alerts the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and says, we have 2 men who have sighted the new moon. The high priest stands up on top of the Temple Mount, all the way up on the Temple Mount, and he calls out to those 2 witnesses, come up hither, come up here. And those 2 witnesses ascend up onto the Temple Mount, appear before the elders and the high priest, giving their sighting of the new moon, and just as soon as both of them give the concurring witness, the high priest says, sound the trumpets! And the trumpets blast on the Temple Mount. Then down the Tyropoeon Valley, up on Mount Zion, they have the wood stacked, they put the torch to the fire, and a pillar of fire and a cloud of smoke goes up into the air, and then to Bet Kara and out to Tekoa, and all the mountaintops throughout the land of Israel. That's where the sentries, the watchmen, are watching. And when they see it off in the distance, they see that fire and that pillars of smoke, then they take the torch, they put it to the wood, and that pillar of fire goes up, they blow the shofar, and within an hour, the entire land of Israel knows it is Rosh Chodesh. It is the sanctification of the new moon. It is the first day of the new month. It's a lot more interesting than looking at our watch and saying, well, I guess it's the first again. But see, these are the Moedim, the rehearsals that God has put in His culture of His people, the living oracles that show the picture of the coming Messiah and what He must fulfill. Now, when do years begin? Years begin in the spring of the year, just as the Scripture says. It is the month of the Abib. And here we have on the chart before you the month of the Abib, and it is generally the first new moon after the vernal equinox. However, that's not the way it's determined. After the 12th month of the year, and right now we are in the 12th month of the year according to the corrected biblical Hebrew calendar, then when the first sliver of the new moon appears, what we do is we go out into the barley fields in the land of Israel and we inspect the barley. Because we know that if this is the month of the Abib, that as early as 15 days later, we are going to perform the first fruits sheaf gathering and that first fruits wave offering on the first day after the weekly Sabbath during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so to do that, the barley must be Abib, which is in reference to a level of maturity of the barley harvest. Now, if the barley is not Abib, if it's not mature, and how we tell is we take some barley and we put it in the fire. And when the fire then singes that barley, if the barley is not Abib, all of the seed heads will just be vaporized. There will be nothing left. But if you put it in the fire and then it leaches out all of the moisture and you could actually take that grain and grind it, then the barley is Abib. So we see that when the first sliver of the new moon after the 12th month appears, if it is Abib, then it's the month of the Abib. If not, it is Adar Bet, and I will show you that in just a few moments as far as on your chart and how you understand that. Now you see that that corresponds with the Gregorian, or as I affectionately call it, the pagan dates of March and April, which are named after other gods. Iyar corresponds with April, May, approximately, Sawan, May, and June. Now we come to, of course, we already discussed when millenniums begin, in the year 1 through the year 1000. So all millenniums change on the years 0001. And now we come to the 4th month. You notice the name of the 4th month. Can anyone pronounce that for me? Tammuz. Tammuz. Right on the biblical Hebrew calendar, we have the month of Tammuz. That's what it is on the Jewish calendar. Does anyone know anything about Tammuz? We read about Tammuz in Ezekiel 8. It talks about the the women weeping for Tammuz. Now, what is this women weeping for Tammuz? What do we have going on here? We have to just step back a little bit and find out who Tammuz's mother was. Because his mother was married to Nimrod. Nimrod, the builder of the Tower of Babel, that's his fame. He died and he ascended up into heaven and became the sun, or the sun god. Now, many, many months later, after his death and then ascension, and he became the sun god, then his widow, Semiramis, became pregnant, and the story was she became pregnant by the rays of the sun, her husband who ascended into heaven. Now, I don't know too many people who nowadays would believe that story. especially if your daughter tried to tell it to you. But this was the story, that she became pregnant with the rays of the sun. Now, she gave birth to Tammuz on December 25th. That is the birthday of the Babylonian sun god, December 25th. And I think it's important probably to point out, see, we went into captivity in Babylon. We were involved in the worship of Tammuz. We know his birthday was December 25th. We came out of Egypt. We know that the Egyptian sun god Ra was born on December 25th. The Romans hung us on the cross, which was the sign of the Roman sun god Mithra, who was born on December 25th. They sacrificed Jews to their sun god Mithra, born on December 25th. And Antiochus Epiphanes came into Jerusalem, slaughtered a pig on the altar in 168 BC, and set up a statue of Zeus, the Greek sun god, on December 25th, his birthday. Now there's one day I will guarantee you that Jesus of Nazareth was not born. It's December 25th. That's why if Western Gentile Christians attempt to try to witness to Jews and they have Jesus dressed up in a bunch of pagan sun god garments, then don't blame them if they don't believe it, because you've got them dressed up looking like a pagan sun god. They're not supposed to be worshiping pagan sun gods, and don't dress Jesus up like that. He was born on Tishri 15, and if you can't celebrate his birthday on the right date, then don't celebrate any pagan sun god's birthday. So it is that we have the month of Tammuz. Now, what happened is Semiramis died. But, as luck would have it, she was reincarnated on the first Sunday after the vernal equinox as Easter, the goddess of fertility, who came down out of heaven in this giant egg, landing in the Euphrates River, busting out and turning a bird into an egg-laying rabbit. Then Tammuz died, as luck would have it. Now you do use the word facetiously, because he died by being gored by a wild boar in his 40th year. And so, from then on, after his death, he was worshipped by setting aside one day of weeping for Tammuz for each year of his life. So the 40 days preceding the day when his mother was reborn as Easter, the goddess of fertility, that is set aside the 40 days of weeping for Tammuz. Now I think it's called Lent. And then on Easter Sunday, then they kill the wild boar that killed Tammuz and eat ham on Easter Sunday. This is the sick sun god perversion that Israel got into, and God says it's an abomination. It's utterly detestable, repugnant, and putrid. The word abomination, one of the strongest words in the entire Hebrew language. And of course, we see that same thing has been adopted by the Christian Gentile church, and they think it's in worship of the true God. It is not. It is utterly detestable to the true God, and he said, do not learn the way of the heathen. Do not learn how they serve their gods. Do it and say you're doing it for me. It's an abomination. So those who would say, well, it doesn't mean that to me, well, it really doesn't matter what it means to you. We don't worship you. We worship the true God. And if he says it's an abomination, then it's an what? Abomination. Just pure and simple.